Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Robin Ness. I'm a part-time student in the program and a full-time student here at Brown. When I started my practicum in the archives at the Hay in January, I was actually working in the Rock in digital production services, but in April I was fortunate enough to be able to accept a position at the Hay, which meant that in many ways my practicum experience not only involved developing a project using primary World War I sources from the archives, but also learning the skills of my new job as a member of the Reader Services staff. Being located in the Hay also meant that I had an incredible increase of access to materials, which brings me to the first thing that I learned. Unlimited access is every researcher's dream, but for someone who really loves conducting research, having access to so many wonderful materials can be challenging in that it can prove difficult to move beyond the research phase. I still want to conduct research on this project. On future projects, I've learned that I will need to be stricter with myself about the amount of time dedicated to research. So this is at the Hay in May of 1918, just when the American involvement in the war was really heating up. And this is my stockpile of World War I related materials on reserve for me. University archivist Jennifer Betts supervised my practicum, and the project we developed takes a look at Brown University during the years of the Great War. I learned many surprising facts about what took place on campus during that time. For instance, to contribute to the national food conservation efforts, Brown faculty members planted war gardens. This is on the Metcalf estate near Session Street, and that's President Vance himself lending a hand. In October of 1918, after the flu epidemic hit Providence, Brown made the decision to quarantine the entire campus, and they stationed armed guards at the gates, and no one could leave the campus to go downtown for any reason. People had to have special passes to come and go. Manning Hall was the headquarters of Brown's Naval Training Unit, and a cannon was placed outside. There were 2 machine guns out there, all trained on the John Hay Library. I have learned that the library's WordPress account is quite frustrating to work with and requires a lot of support from technical staff. This is a screenshot of the main page of the Brown and the Great War website that I've developed, which will soon go live. It's still being tweaked a little bit. It features 15 stories that kind of illuminate the social landscape of Brown during those years. The honor roll contains brief biographies of the 41 students and alumni and the 1 faculty member that died during the war. Some of you may have experienced this also. I learned that the topic of your practicum is likely to greatly affect your summer reading list. And I think that I recently started reading Magic Mountain because psychologically I needed to get back to a place before the horrible war ever even began. But the rest of the summer was pretty much war and flu. Most importantly, I've learned the names, faces, and stories of the Brown students, alumni, and faculty who lost their lives in the war, and they will stay with me for a very long time. This is George Behrman, a non-graduate of the class of 1920. The last letters that he wrote home to his family are held in the archives and will be available on the website along with transcriptions. And finally, I should admit, somewhat embarrassingly, that I've also learned that it's possible to have a mini crush on a Brown student who was killed in action nearly 100 years ago on the Champagne front. George. And I have plenty of time for questions.
Questions?
Yes.
Who tweeted this? Or like,
I set up a Twitter feed. It's at BrownWW1. Please follow. I do a combination of images relating to Brown's involvement in the war, but I also highlight materials from different collections. We have Brown sheet music collection, broadsides, World War I posters, and so on. So it's illuminating those artifacts alongside photographs from campus during that time, and the honor roll.
When do you think the site will be live? You'll let us know, though.
I will definitely let you know. I'm going to be publicizing it. I would say a couple weeks. We're doing some final edits, and I'm getting feedback from Peter Harrington this weekend and Jane Lancaster and Jennifer, just to make some last-minute changes.
Great, thank you, Rob.
For my summer practicum, I led an in-depth process of open and honest dialogue with community leaders and design professionals on how the Seattle Architecture Foundation could most benefit Seattle neighborhoods. I met with a total of 26 individuals representing 23 different organizations and 6 different Seattle neighborhoods to advise the design of a new program series and writing of a detailed report of future programmatic recommendations for SAF. And 5 things that I learned. I learned to listen. I spent the summer meeting with community leaders, listening to their ideas on how public programming around architecture and design could help residents become advocates for designing their neighborhoods on their terms. I also learned about all of the problems associated with community engagement work, and if you're gonna do it, some tips on how to do it right. Kids can be a tough audience. I learned to meet kids where they are, talking first about what's on their minds, and then adapting that to what's on my mind, if we even get that far. I learned how to make the world's best pie from my unlikely roommate and now very good friend, 65-year-old fisherman and master baker, Michael Hagan. Picture here, a huckleberry pie that we made together. And last but not least, I learned that I surprisingly love hiking. And the Pacific Northwest is full of incredible hiking experiences. Now that I'm back in Providence, I'm looking forward to hiking through New England.
Hi everyone, my name is Barbara. I'm a second-year student at the MA program in Public Humanities. And this summer I did my internship in MACLA, which is located in San Jose, California. So MACLA is an inclusive contemporary art space grounded in the Chicano and Latino experience. And they do a lot of work related to visual arts, performance art, literary arts, and also they have a really interesting youth program. So what I did there was related with both sides of MACLA, programming, and also with the youth program. So the first thing I learned, it is the importance of collaboration. First, within different organizations, like partnerships. MACLA has 2 interesting partnerships. One is Sofa Sundays, and the other one is called South Fair Fridays. And it is really interesting how partnerships are a great way to achieve common goals. And the other important thing I learned about collaboration is how within your teamwork, you can build better things if you are collaborating among you all. And the second picture is the video team at the youth program. They were creating the second video during the summer. Another thing I learned, it is about Chicano and Latino art and artists. One of my responsibilities was to research about possible artists for the upcoming exhibits happening at MACLA. One of them is this exhibit called, I remember the name, Found in Translation. So I get to know a lot about artists and topics related to Chicano and Latino experience. And 2 of the things that I really like, I had the chance to learn, are 2 concepts actually. One is placekeeping instead of playmaking, and the other one is rascuachismo, which is a Chicano thing that I will be glad to discuss with all of you later. The third thing I learned it is the importance of the balance of fun and work. Fun-free times within the periods of work are always good, not just as a way to relax and recharge your energies, but also because allow other kind of interactions within people, like a teamwork, and that hopefully positively will create a better place to work or live, I don't know. So the first one is Fun Fridays that we have in the youth program. I'm trying to take that lesson and include it in my weekly schedule. Fourth thing, it is be patient. This is a picture of the other summer intern and I on our last day at Macla, where we get to be princess. And for you to be a princess, you have to be patient. Not that I learned actually how to be patient, but I learned that I need to be patient. When I first came to Macla, I was hoping to do all the fun stuff that I think I was gonna do, and I realized that will take time because it is a process to get the trust of the people you're working with. And last but not least, do not forget the permits. Again, yes. It is so easy to immerse ourselves in all the interesting things and projects we are doing. So it is easy also to forget these kind of things that have to be done for our projects to get done. This is a permit that we had to work because we wanted an artist to paint a mural on the building, on Macla's building, so we had to ask for a permit to close the sidewalk. So yeah, that's bureaucratic things, but super important. So I think that's it.
Thank you.
Yes. Do you have any questions?
What does the youth program look like?
So they work a lot with digital media. They have a music studio. They record a lot of songs from the youth, and they have a video program as well. So it is a mixture. I don't know because that's specifically for the summer program. I don't know how the whole year program looks like. Okay, thank you.
So good afternoon. My name is Jess Smith, for those of you I haven't met yet, although I think I've met every one of you. So I am a public humanities student. I'm doing the program part-time while I'm working full-time, and you'll hear more about that. So what I'm going to do is tell you 5 things I learned in 5 minutes. So what I did this summer is I spent time working at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, which is in Boston. And what I considered and researched was, could we find ways to offer more free admission times at the Gardner Museum? So I spoke with a really wide range of staff from many different departments, and I researched what other museums in the area do. I looked really closely at our attendance numbers, and I considered how this idea of more free admission for the Gardner Museum could connect with larger museum goals around community engagement and connecting with local Boston residents. So lesson number 1 is that it's crucial to keep legacy and mission top of mind, of course, and we all know this in our work with public humanities projects and programs, but it's really important to keep in mind, of course. So this is a great image of Isabella Stewart Gardner, who created this really beautiful, strange museum in Boston, and so our work at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum is inspired by her legacy. So keeping that legacy and then the current museum's mission top of mind is really, of course, important. But then also we need to think about all of the practicalities of what that means today. So we have these very lofty goals of engagement and changing people's lives through our work at the museum. But then you can see this is an image of long lines at the museum. And so as I started talking with colleagues about, how can we talk about opening up the museum for these free admission times, how would this work? What are concerns? Crowding is a huge concern, of course. We have this very fragile, beautiful, historic building, and so as I spoke with people, crowding is a major concern. So there's this constant back and forth between this beautiful legacy and mission and the very real practicalities of bodies in that space. Lesson number 3 is that museums can be really complicated places. And so as I spoke with all these different individuals in the museum, they all had very, very strong opinions about what we should do and how I should go about this free admission project and the sort of ways I should approach it. So passionately held views and lots of them. And there are lots of complexities of working in museums, which is part of the challenge and really part of the fun. So lesson number 4 is that working at museums, you end up meeting a lot of really amazing people. So this is my colleague Damon, who is our director of community engagement, and he and I spoke a lot about this project and relating to his work. And that's really one of the things that I found most interesting and rewarding about this summer's practicum is that I got to sort of step away from my day-to-day work and ask these really big questions about why do we want to engage with the public? What do we mean by local community? How do we want to bring our mission to life? So these really big, meaty questions, and I was able to speak with my colleagues about them, which was really, really fantastic. So working with lovely people is great. So lesson number 5 is that summer passes so swiftly and it is so sweet. I love summer, it's just so great. And this is my bike path that I, in my little neighborhood in Boston, where I would get on my little bike and bike to work, and it was just really delightful. So I have a little bit of advice for the first year students in the audience, and that is, find a fantastic summer practicum, of course, and work really hard and learn new things, meet new people, but also try and take some time to savor your summer and enjoy the place where you're living. Try to slow down, go to the beach, sleep in, and relax a little bit. So those are my 5 lessons. Okay, I think we're right at 5 minutes, but okay.
What did you decide?
Well, we have lots of different options, and I still have many, many more people to speak with. So I have some recommendations, but I still have lots of work to do. So I'll keep you posted. Hopefully you'll be seeing great announcements from the Gardner Museum soon.
Not even a hint?
Well, maybe later. I'll give you some hints.
Okay. Okay, wait, let me start my stopwatch. Hold.
Doesn't count.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sarah Dilla, and as most of you know, I spent the summer here in Providence working for the John Hay Library with Christopher Geisler and a large team on the staff for a project that culminated in an exhibit and a series of programs in conjunction with the biennial H.P. Lovecraft extravaganza, the Necronomicon. So the Hay holds an extensive collection of materials related to the author and his broad network of associates. The holdings illuminate both his significant contributions to the genres of horror and science fiction, as well as his undeniable complexity and prejudice. And the thousands of individuals that visit this collection and inquire about it over the year illuminate his lasting relevance and intrigue within a very driven fan community. So, needless to say, the task of stepping into the world of the Cthulhu mythos was a bit intimidating for me at first. Having worked on exhibits at the Hay for the past year, the Lovecraft exhibit was the first time I really got a chance to step back and reflect on the institution I was working in, the role of exhibits in that space, and the process of developing exhibits. So I was able to focus solely on realizing this project without classes. Spending so much time scouring over the boxes of correspondence in the collection, I became quite fascinated with Lovecraft's letters, and something about his complex relationship with progress really stuck with me. So in that vein, but admitting to my much less complex relationship with progress, I am utilizing the big ideas from the history of science to help me explain my practicum, how my practicum enabled me to think about my work in new and different ways. So small footnote, if anyone is a secret scientist, I'm sorry for my egregious oversimplifications. But my first lesson can be summed up in Newton's third law of motion, which everyone should know. So this summer started out with plans to do what I thought was a very small renovation project in the gallery in order to have a more flexible wall surface behind the exhibit cases. Little did any of us know that the drywalling project would disrupt the entire operation. Special collections would be inaccessible, bathrooms closed, workflows altered. So this experience provided me with a powerful realization of working in an institution around me, and questions of the overlapping definitions of places where exhibits are just a portion of the programs. My second lesson came from the research process, or possibly Schrodinger's indeterminate cat. So just as there is a finite chance of finding a particle where you wouldn't expect to, there is an uncertainty to what remains unobserved in the archives. The John Hay, like many a special collection, is rampant with unfriendly finding aids, backlog, idiosyncratic storage, and just things that have been forgotten about over the years. So the research process for the exhibit was definitely punctuated with several serendipitous discoveries of such material, like this unaccessioned letter that was hidden in the vault. That was kind of a puzzle piece for us. Next, I wanted to share my thoughts about choosing items and thinking about interpretation. During these parts of the project, my internal dialogue became what could only be deemed as the cultural institution version of the atomism-planism debate. So the planism, a view of space as one ubiquitous field where whatever objects may populate it are outside of direct human experience, seems to be what an unsuccessful exhibit is that does not engage the viewer. So I'm interested in the atomist approach to exhibit planning. The philosophy of atomism sees the universe as a continuum of material only until analysis comes into play, and it is through the act of description that something becomes a discrete and understandable object. So these are an example of an atom, where it became a story after we found it about mentorship and not just weird juvenilia. My fourth summer contemplation was related to display and viewership, or rather William James's thoughts on human attention and the components of field margin and focus. Inviting the visitor to concentrate, and in particular read, is a considerable challenge in the exhibit setting. Through display methods and content, we tried to play with the ways to make objects capture different levels of focus. The field was the experience of the environment, the margins were literal frames of each object, and the focus, for the focus we raised an intriguing object up to meet you. And lastly, my practicum enabled me to think more effectively about uses of technology in the gallery space, a la the information theories of Claude Shannon. So in addition to the physical exhibit, we proposed a new template for the library's online exhibits. It was tough to come up with a Brown WordPress-friendly format for that, but it seems to be working out, and we are slowly integrating more technology into the physical exhibits. So that concludes my 5 lessons, and since I'm not a concise person, there are all the things that I felt like I left out. That's it.
Thank you for that very interdisciplinary presentation. Questions on matters of science or humanities?
humanities racism.
How many people have seen the exhibit? Or if you haven't seen the exhibit, you must go. Maybe I'll just say that way, I won't call you out. I need to go again, so I was thinking I would go again this weekend. Can you go to the Hay on the weekends?
You can now, in the semester, not over the summer, so it's open on Sundays, I forget. It's either Saturday or Sunday, okay.
Not on Sunday.
Not on Sunday.
And when does it close?
Oh, yeah, the exhibit is up through January 8th, so plenty of time.
And are you and Christopher happy with the attendance and the interaction that you've had from visitors?
Yeah, it's been good. I mean, it was really great during the Necronomicon, obviously, that was the prime audience.
Had they ever come to the Hay before, the folks in the next?
Yeah, it really depended on who they were. A lot of them have done research there. A lot of
Has the Hay
like.
ever reached out to them during the convention though?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had programs with a lot of. There are even groups of fiction writers that come in and look at materials and then do right. So it's varying scholars and writers and just your straight up fan. So.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Rhea Sagal, and this summer I did too many things. So I spent my 400 odd hours this summer split between two institutions, the Queens Museum and the Gateway Project, though I often spent my Queens Museum time offsite at Merrill Laderman Euclid's archives in the New York City Department of Sanitation and in Flushing Meadows Corona Park for their new Studio in the Park summer residency program, and on some rare occasions at my home in Brooklyn. So my work life spanned 2 cities and 3 boroughs. In retrospect, I may have spread myself on the thin side, but this expansive experience taught me the following and much more. So 1, small is beautiful. A cheesy saying, I know, but tininess was a very big theme for me at both the Gateway and Queens. So the Studio in the Park was created by an organization called Art Built, who were inspired by the tiny houses movement in the Pacific Northwest to build small mobile studios that you can see here as a solution to the space crisis for artists. So I spent a lot of time this summer running public programs out of a space that was roughly the size of my bedroom. I also worked on public programs at the Queens Museum itself, some of which had as few as 7 participants, like Naeem Mohaimin's brilliant tour of collaborative and video works in the Modern Contemporary Indian Art exhibition After Midnight, for which I was responsible for creating public programs. And in both cases and spaces, I found that the small sizes created intimacy and encouraged conversation and participation. The reach may have been small, but the connections were deep. And then here at the bottom, you see artist Matt Jensen's project. He was one of the Studio in the Park residents. And his project involved collecting tiny cosmic objects from his walks around the city of New York. And his collection pieced together, created a beautiful, surprising, and sometimes baffling portrait of New York City. And the Gateway Project was a brand new organization when I joined, just about 2 months old in a newly renovated space, and had only 2 full-time staff who were the directors. And this infant stage allowed me to do a lot. Proposal writing, strategic planning, curating, art handling, designing, studio visiting, a lot. 2. So there is no such thing as a safe space. If you don't know this, know it now. Though the Safer Spaces movement has had many proponents, it is predicated upon the fact that safety is an illusory contract. And as folks hoping to work in trusting institutions, knowing exactly what that contract entails and how to enforce it is very important. I learned the hard way that even our friendly, public-oriented spaces of discovery and meditation and sharing do not always ensure the safety of ourselves and our property. My laptop got stolen off my desk at the Gateway Project by a gallery visitor. So I now continue to remind myself that our romantic notions of communities don't necessarily account for the lived realities of working with and in public. 3, putting the social in social practice. Perhaps the reason I am drawn to social practice, aside from the aforementioned romance of community, is that I like people. And this summer I made friends with my bosses and collaborators and with folks who attended public programs. One thing I really appreciated about the Queens Museum and Mobile Print Power, who was our other residency project, was the deep emphasis on building relationships that last. including people in the collective, and creating platforms for networks to share their work. 4, love thy transit. I know this sounds hard for those of you who deal with RIPTA, but in other places it's totally possible. So as you can see, I was pretty far flung this summer. Those stars represent some of the places that I existed. So I spent a lot of time in transit, usually on trains. The G train, which is like a big joke in New York, the 7, the PATH train connecting me to New Jersey, occasionally on foot, as in the case of my walk with artist Matthew Jensen from the Upper East Side to Corona on a punishingly hot day. And through my avid transit ridership, I learned a lot about public spaces and human geographies, and I re-upped my appreciation for podcasts. Radiolab. So public humanities learning abounds even in seemingly transitional spaces. Finally, diversity. Some of you may know my obsession with diversity. I am part of a performance collaborative called Diversity Fellows. I'm doing an independent study this semester on diversity and its discontents. I love and am deeply, deeply critical of diversity, particularly as the discourse has been mobilized in neoliberal institutional structures as an ameliorative device or sign of progress in normative time. But my work this summer really affirmed for me the fact that A, cultural institutions are not all run by well-meaning fancy white people. This is not the field. Don't let anyone tell you this is the field. Other things are possible. And B, multiplicity, interdisciplinarity, and collaboration necessarily move beyond tired diversity rhetorics while upholding some of diversity's promises. That moving outside of singular normie ideas of excellence provides opportunities for many, many more people to learn, share, experience, process, express themselves, think in different ways that will ultimately help to reshape our institutions for multi-everything futures. Thank you. Questions? Questions? Yeah, sorry. I was speaking really fast because I wrote way too much. Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Diane Garvey. This summer I had 2 practicums in the Pacific Northwest, one in Tacoma, Washington at the Museum of Glass, and one at the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience in Seattle, Washington. At the Museum of Glass, my main focus was in the curatorial department, and I worked on researching and proposing interactive elements for an upcoming Albert Paley exhibition. At the Wing Luke, I worked in the exhibitions development department working on an exhibit of Pacific Islander tattoo rituals. And my main project at the Wing was to create an oral history film featuring people sharing stories related to their tattoo. So on to 5 of the many things that I learned this summer. There is no single most ethical way to produce museum exhibitions. Shared authority work is cumbersome, and we all know it takes a lot more time to reach a consensus when you're carrying out a couple or few dozen ideas. But I've always believed that in the end, letting go and sharing authorship is the best way to create ethical work, especially in a museum setting. So even though it takes more time and effort, which we know, but I've come to realize that it's not just time that is sacrificed with this kind of work, with this shared authorship. Giving decision-making authority to people who aren't actually going to do the work is not always the most ethical way to collaborate. I think there's an idea that this is most often seen in a business setting where orders are coming from the top down, and the person in power may not have a grasp on what workers actually face implementing what the top is requiring. But it turns out that this problem does not go away when you shift power dynamics. So being given authority over something without understanding, without having an understanding of the execution is unlikely to yield a high quality product in the end. And I believe that shared authority participatory work is essential, but old methods of this need to be reworked to be efficient, ethical, and effective towards the ultimate goal, which is the organization's mission. Number 2 is take initiative. So this is not something that I Just learned this summer, of course, but it's been reinforced in a new way for me. You know, if you take initiative to create and propose an innovative, even outside of the box idea, and you really commit to doing the work, supervisors will let you do all sorts of things. Number 3 is that I broadened my perspective of public humanities and where our work can be utilized. One example of this is in the experience economy. Experience economy is used in the for-profit sector as a way to think about how businesses can provide memorable events for people, and that these memories and experiences are often the actual product that people are buying. But of course, these concepts can be utilized cross-sector. The opportunity for museums and cultural institutions to join part of this economy is huge, and I think public humans can really contribute to that. Number 4, interactives in museums give you the opportunity to consult with many departments, which is great if you're working with Practicum because you get exposure to a variety of jobs. And also because they all look at interactives through a different lens. So this helped me propose interactives that a wider variety of stakeholders at the museum and the artists themselves liked because it addressed their unique concerns. And the 5th thing I learned is that it's important to leave space for unexpected opportunities. Later on in the summer, I started to free up a morning once a week that I just left open, and it allowed me to jump into meetings at the museum, whether it was all staff meetings, meeting with the executive director, artistic director, different artists that we had coming in. And it gave me the opportunity to introduce myself to a lot of people that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet otherwise. Those are 5 things I learned this summer. If you have any other questions about my practicum or anything I mentioned in this presentation, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks for your time.
Hi, I'm Nico. I'm second year. Everybody knows me. I'm the caretaker. So I'm going to talk about my practicum. I made 2 practicums this summer, so you can do it. One was in the Queens Museum in New York, and the other one was here in ASU20. Both settings was very, very different, but they have something in common that I have to talk and be related with the community. So my first practicum was in New York, was specifically in the education department in the New Yorkers program, and was very, very fun. We see each other with Ria, and we have to have a lot of things related with. So the New Yorkers program, it's a program for adults principally, and it's for mostly people who are from China, from Latin America, that came to the museum and start learning new skills through art, through culture, and it was very, very fun. I have this opportunity to work with Sol Aramendi, and she's an Argentinian artist in New York. She is a social practitioner, so I think that some people of the first year had to read about Pablo Liguera's book because of me, because I have to read that too for the New Yorkers program, and it was very fun because that helped me to connect with a lot of people there, to a lot of artists there in New York from the Latino community. And my second practicum was at ASU20, and ASU20 had the chance to meet with a lot of people from the community here at Providence, mostly from the Latino community, because I'm doing an outreach program for Latin American people. So, you're going to ask me, like, why Nico put this? So, because sometimes we feel like minions, you know, like, even if we have these like greatest skills of experts, you know, we have like, oh, Nico, can you cut paper? So Nico was cutting paper. Oh, Nico, can you go and put some flyers there? Nico go and put some flyers there. So we're like feeling like you have to work for this big institution, but you're the lowest one, like minions. So rule number 0, listen. You always have to listen to your community. Like, community never likes the experts. It's like someone going into your house and say how to clean your house. It's like, dude, who are you? Like, it's my house. It's my problem how I clean it. It's something like that. So even if you know things and you have studied here for 2 years, you will never know more than them. They will know all the needs, how to do the stuff, how things should be done. So first of all, even if you know and you have too many ideas, just listen. And then you can execute. Second thing, highlight good things first. What is that? So I have the good chance that my two bosses in New Yorkers and in ISU20, every time I have to do something and I have to show them first for approval, they highlight all the good things first. And they told me, oh, but maybe you should just change this little thing. But even that very specific, like, oh, Nico, that doesn't matter. Like, for me, it was a huge deal because I felt that I was doing good things very good. It was just mess, like, oh, Nico, you don't know how to do anything. No, I knew that. And it was perfect. And I feel very good. And that helped me to feel I was in a very good community inside. You know what I mean? So every time I have to do something, they say, this is very good, but blah, blah, blah. You have to change these very little things. Networking. So after every session at the New Yorkers, we used to hang out with people. It was very good. I knew, because of Sol, she has been in New York for 15 years, so she knows New York perfectly. And I have the chance through, I don't know, barbecues, grills, or I don't know, hanging out with people to know more people. And for example, now I'm helping an artist in residence now in ASU20, and she knows Sol. And I was like, oh, I was in New York during the summer. Oh, you know Sol? Yes! Blah, 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 blah. Perfect, love. You know, it was instant love. And that is what networking helps you, is to start connecting with people and helps you to get some gigs, for example, or like being known in the community. I don't know. But networking is very useful and you should do that, not just work. So I'm going to quote a philosopher from, he put this into, Ron, thank you. You put this into the blog post. And nothing beats face-to-face contact, and that's so true. Specifically for the Latino community. For example, Latinos, me, Barbara, we prefer like face-to-face contact. Like even if we have like cell phones, smartphones, emails, texts, I don't know, like pigeons, we prefer the face-to-face contact. And we have a lot of problems in AS220 like that, because people, Barbara, this is very serious. In AS220, my main target is Latino community, and even if you give them your cell phone, and even if you give them the email, they will just going to look for you. So, and if you're going to try to start like a trust relationship with the community there, you have to just go with them, talk with them, I don't know, have a drink, coffee. I can't drink coffee, but never mind. But sit with them and show them what do you have to offer to the community. Stop, take a breath, and be goofy. This is very related with the networking slide, because as Jessie says, the practicum is not just about working and don't have a summer and feel miserable. Like, so that was my boss at New Yorkers program, Nunxing, and he's the director of the Fat Lab at Med. And we were having a great time. And now we know each other, and we have it on Facebook, and we're like super like cybernetic friends now. But because of this time of being goofy, made it possible to have this relationship too. And this is the most important one. I learned how to master the New York Metro skill. So for people who knows me, I have like the worst sense of directions
of the world.
Yeah, it's
Yes. Like, it's terrible. Like, I remember that the day before I met Susan, I was just trembling, like, I'm going to be, I don't know, I need to go to Staten Island, and I'm going to be in Bronx, and what I'm going to do there. The only day that we kind of like messed up with was with Rhea. But I went to Bronx, I went to Staten Island, I went to Brooklyn, I went to Coney Island. You know what it means to go to Coney Island and don't get like stuck in the metro station during Sundays? That's a lot. So please, just if you are scared about something, you have to just do it and jump in. Thank you so much.
I have a question. You said you worked on the outreach program at ACE 220?
Yes,
What
at
is-
the Latino Community Outreach Program.
So what is the outcome of that, or what is the program?
So, the thing is that age 20, they have this stigma that they are like a white community serving for white people. And for this kind of state that's almost 40% Latino people, that's kind of like a struggle, you know? Because there are an open program for all kind of people. They don't segregate no one, like everything is ensured. So, they're trying to get the community be involved with them. You know what I mean? So, there's a lot of people who are exhibiting, how do you say that? Exhibiting. At age 20, they're doing programs, but they're almost, I don't know, 80% they're white. So, so immediately they're excluding people from colors or from other nations, I don't know. Because the other people, the other organizations and communities, they don't know nothing about institution. It's not because they feel they just, it's not their place, it's just because they don't know. So, part of my job is to talk with people, go to their organizations, like, hey, we are instituting and we have all this stuff to offer to you.
So has there been increased engagement?
It's, well, you know that to build trust takes a lot. So, specifically with people from Latino community, I'm not going to trust you because I saw you once. So it's something that you have to keep going. Yeah, but we just started during the summer.
Nico, did you think that the atmosphere of being a minion was different in AS 220 than at the Queens Museum? Because, you know, the AS 220 rule that everyone gets paid the same, all the way from the executive director down to the people who serve the food. Does that make any difference, do you think?
Well, I'm not being paid for.
I understand, but I just meant, was the feeling in the staff different, or did they treat you differently?
It's just two different spaces. It's like asking who you love more, your daughter or your mom. It's like,
No, I
you
wasn't
cannot
saying what you
compare.
liked, but whether the feeling among the staff was different.
Yeah, it's completely different because they have another like view of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like their age 20 is of course more informal than a museum, that's Queen's Museum. But even if the two spaces were very different, I feel very like loved, comfortable
Yeah.
in those two spaces in a very different way. But the good things, for example, now in ASU 20, now most of the directors are female and they're colored female, so that makes me feel more comfortable. I'm working directly with Shay, and Shay talks me like in Spanish. But we have a lot like Spanish talking, and I feel more comfortable talking in Spanish, of course. But for me, New York was a very, very, very great experience too.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so my name's Maya. I completed my summer practicum at Rhode Island College, working with 2 professors in the youth development major. So youth development is a combination between 3 departments, so it's education, social work and nonprofit management. But the two professors I worked with, they're in education. And so for them, I helped them to develop a, a program evaluation. So they're going to graduate their third cohort this coming May and have done no work evaluating the program and seeing if it's actually working and effective. So that's what I did. So my 5 points of advice.
That's my mom.
Yes.
That's good.
The first one I would say is try something new. So I originally started my practicum in Chile. I didn't stay there for lots of reasons, but for me it was a new continent, it was a new country, it was having to speak in Spanish all the time even though I'm not fluent.
Tell me about that.
Yes. I stayed with Nico's family. Her mom is in the top left. One thing you will do in Latin American countries is eat a lot. Like people always tell me, oh, you're too skinny, you need to eat, you need to eat. Anything you do, you need to eat. So I did a lot of that no matter where I went. People I met for the first time, oh, family, come eat. That was like the combination. So that's my first point of advice. My second, so that's Monica. That's another woman I stayed with in Arica. Most people only know New York, so that was my way of telling people where I was from. Oh, I'm 2.5 hours away from New York. So me and that guy had a New York shirt on the same day, so we had to take a picture. And again, that's us eating and eating more food, because that's all I did. My second point is embarrass your friends when you can.
Thank you.
So, Nico's mom was like, I have to show you pictures of my baby. So it was like bags and bags of little Nico. And she looked really sweet. And so now I have
I used to smile.
Scratch that. It's not really my number 2. No. So there was a map there, even though you can't really tell.
It's
So
black.
no, it was gray. So my second point is advocate for yourself. So like I said, I originally started in Chile, but I loved the people that I was staying with, and I met some really cool people, but ultimately I decided that my site was not the right place for me. So I had to make a decision to make that 16-hour flight back, a whole month and a half before I intended to. But I think ultimately it was the best decision for me, and ended up completing a practicum that I was okay with. So that's my second point of advice. Which I thought everyone was supposed to use Minions, but somebody clearly didn't post it. But my third point is it is okay to be a Minion. I think I've always had this aversion to internships. I never did it when I was in undergrad because it was like, oh, it's just me doing work that people don't want to do. But I found out that the professors wanted a survey, but they just didn't have the time to do it. So that's where I came in. So in that sense, it was okay for me to be a Minion. And I really enjoyed it. My fourth point is ask a lot of questions, a lot of them. So I had only worked with the education department for this youth development program. I had no experience. I've never met any of the professors from nonprofit or social work. And so trying to develop a evaluation survey for all 3 programs was very difficult because I didn't know what students were getting in the other courses. So I think through talking to them and asking them so many questions, we were able to come up with like this 9-point pillar system. So the idea is that students should be hitting these 9 pillars throughout the 3 departments and following this idea of a threshold concept. So if students learn certain things, even once they graduate and go into institutions where they don't practice what they learned, they won't be able to separate that and be able to instill those skills and practices in new sites, ultimately creating like the ultimate youth worker. So that's what I did and learned by asking a lot of questions. We collectively were able to think about what the program needs and what was missing, and I was not an expert because I'm not a professor there, so it was very useful for me to ask a lot of questions. My 5th point is traveler's diarrhea is real. So everyone told me not to drink the water, and I was like, okay, I won't drink the water, so I bought bottled water, but I didn't think to apply that to ice.
We needed to talk. This is
I was
one of my
like pooping for a
specialties.
week straight, uncontrollable. Like I was afraid to leave the house because it was just sudden. A combination of these 3 products was ultimately what got me back to normal. So if you do travel out of the country, water that includes ice as well. I would not use it. I
It's
don't know.
called chilenitis. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't drink water from Chile.
No.
I
No.
told you.
Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question, but maybe you can just tell me later. I'm doing some work on evaluation and thinking this through. And I wondered if you had, something you read about evaluation that was particularly useful for evaluating college classes or evaluating work, or someone who'd done it very well, or did you use any sources, or did you just come up with new stuff by talking to the faculty?
No, so I think developing the 9 threshold points was very helpful. I wouldn't say that there's any scholarly text that I read, but there was this really good survey for youth work that I did reference in creating a survey for them that I can share.
Good.
All right. So, my name is Annie Puligura. I am a second year in American Studies and Public Humanities, and my work, as I'm probably sure everyone knows, is about museum studies and cultural history, which is why when I was thinking about where I wanted to spend my summer, I decided to go into the heart of museum land in America and the Smithsonian. My presentation is entitled Work in Progress because the National Museum of African American History and Culture is obviously in progress. It will be open at a future date to be determined. And one thing that everyone should already know about government work is that asking the government for specifics is just inviting hilarity into your life. So if you ask me when the museum is going to open, I will smile at you and say, soon. That's what you need to know about that. Okay, but here's a great picture. So when I was over there in the summer, they were kind of building the construction of the museum site, which meant that our offices were actually at a separate building just off the National Mall, right behind the Air and Space Museum. But I would walk around the mall and just to check on the progress of the site. So this was my last day of the practicum, so this is the last picture I had of the building. So you can see it's finally taking shape and it looks kind of cool. All right, so my presentation is kind of divided around 3 guiding principles, and then I have some mini lessons in between that, because I wanted to share both my research and also the work that I did. So first of all, there is always work to do in the museum, and you should do it. It might feel like it's really cumbersome and tiresome work, and it definitely felt like that. My first day, I met with my supervisor, Nancy Burkon, who's a fantastic curator and scholar, and she's the curator for the Slavery and Freedom Gallery, so one of the 11 galleries that will go up in the museum, which is a really tremendous task to have to cram that history of, I think they started from pre-colonial Africa and they ended with the Reconstruction. So it's a huge amount of history to kind of put into this gallery. And so the first day when I met her, she gave me the entire script of the gallery, hundreds and hundreds of pages of it, and said, read this, tell me what's wrong. So those are all my notes about all the things that I found wrong. Those were things like spelling errors, credit lines that weren't completed, permissions that still need to be made about acquiring different objects from around the institutions and outside the Smithsonian as well. People whose names were spelled wrong, how do we spell Aquiano? That's things like that. So those were my notes that I kind of made here. And I made it blurry so you guys can't read it because I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to show you this. So I will possibly deny everything if it gets out of this room. But it's important, I think, that even though it does feel like the museum work, especially building a national museum, has a lot of material to be done and a lot of little tiny things that have to be finished and accomplished, and it can get tedious. But someone has to do it, and it's really fun to have to do it with a community of, a working community that is in there with you. So that's one of the things that I really enjoyed. But what kind of work did I do? So my job, so by the time I got there, the script was almost finished. So I was kind of really doing revision edits on some of the material, so that's what those notes were. But my main job was working on media treatments. So the museum, the gallery, each of the galleries will have those little documentaries that kind of, you walk into the gallery and they have little videos of narrations, like mini documentaries. Those are the different medias. So my job was to come up with the content and sources of potential content that might go into these documentaries that will then complement the written text and the objects that will be displayed. So I had to create these different types of media treatments for all of the different sections. There were like 21 sections in our gallery, and I had to create 21 of them, and it was challenging to say the least. So I'm gonna walk you through some of the different materials that I kind of came up with and the templates that I kind of produced for them, which they will then be continuing to use after I'm gone, which is kind of cool that I kind of did something useful. So here's an example of the media treatment. So this is just a title card. One of the things that I realized about working in a museum of such a huge nature is that people don't always know how and what the best practice is, even people who have been working in the industry for a long time. Just to say that people have different organizations, they have different work patterns, they have different ways of expectations of how to do the work. So my, I think, experience at the museum taught me that it's really good to have an organizing principle to like work around. So I created like this template of how to do a media treatment and how to present it to then the Smithsonian Channel, which would be the production company that's in-house that does all these video treatments. So I'm just gonna walk you through a couple of them. They're not all from the same media treatment, so some of the content will be kind of confusing, but anyway, just cut it. And so here are the mini lessons. All right, so first thing that I'll say is make it clear. So when you're doing something for a museum like this and creating like a mini, tiny little gallery within a gallery, you have to be very clear about what are you trying to show and what is your thesis? What are you trying to tell your audience? So I worked with my supervisor and all the other staff members in this gallery about creating mini theses for each of the galleries that we had to create. So for example, this was one of the theses that we came up with on how to teach transatlantic slavery. So our theme was around the commercialization of the Atlantic world, and that was what we were going to try to show in this video. The other thing to do is to make it organized. So we had to make sure that we had our parameters and we have our challenges in place. So these were all the things that we had to keep in mind while we were gathering content. Things can only be 5 minutes long. It was going to have voiceover narration. This is how big the screen is going to be. Things that you don't really think about when you're a creator trying to gather content, like these structures of the video and how big the screen will be is something that may not always come into your mind, but it's actually very important when you're thinking about the resolution of the video, of the content, how high resolution the images have to be, and if they have to be such high resolution, where can you get the best ones? So what kind of archives do you have to use? All this stuff is really informed by the very real practicalities of creating a video at a certain size for certain people and for a certain topic. So then next thing was make it specific. Where did it go? Oh, make it open, sorry, this one. Make it open. So one of the challenges, and I think I've mentioned this in my blog post a couple of times, is that everyone knows or thinks they know the history of slavery in the United States and what that means. And so we wanted to show a different way to tell that history by reclaiming some of the spaces and giving it back to the people in history or communities in history that may not always have been able to speak for themselves. So the different ways that we try to do that, I can run through some of the ideas, so for example, it's really difficult to show a history of pre-colonial Africa when a lot of the material from the communities that lived at that time may not be textual, they might be visual, or they're physical. They come in different varieties. So how can we give voices back to those living communities and not just tell the story from the Eurocentric perspective? So we tried to do a combination of things. So we would have we would have maps and images made by Europeans, and then complement that with accounts and ethnographies taken from people who lived at the time or remembered some of the areas of pre-colonial, early colonial Africa. So we would basically put these two perspectives together, is the compromise that we decided to come up with. And this occurred in many different places. So when we have the images and paintings that we decided to include would be from very familiar contexts, so different historical societies that people already might recognize. But then we decided to pair it up with finding actual original resources and primary resources that give names back to these slaves that were imported. So we have a list of actual names that we pulled from different newspaper accounts to talk about the fact that these were real people with real lives who were forcibly imported and made to work in this part of the slave economy. So that was one way that we decided to really bring some names and voices back. Same as well, so I don't know, it's kind of like running more through some data. So we use data, statistics, census, a lot of research. I read a lot of books looking for primary quotes. I made graphs, which I never thought I would have to do, but here's a graph I made. But it was kind of fun, but it was all about how do we use as many resources as possible and use them in many different ways to tell a story from a perspective that may not always be familiar or may help to push the conversation in more interesting ways, which is the exciting thing about being at an institution that allows that type of open research. We also had like videos. One thing that we had to do was create a video of the director, Lonnie Bunch, wanted a perspective of the African coast from Africa, and then he just told me to find one, and I was like, how do I do that? Like, I can't go to Africa. So I just went on to Getty Images and try to find, okay, here are some sample videos that may not be what we want to use, but these are ideas that we could use. So I had to make a lot of on specific conversation, really quick turnaround decisions about doing what they want you to do and with very little resources and or not being able to go to Africa yourself. And then one thing that I really implemented that I tried to incorporate a lot of my questions with the work that I was doing here is looking forward and creating suggestions for, even if we can't reach all the types of ways to make the conversation complex in these documentaries, we can still consider the questions of why we're doing it and the questions that we encounter for ourselves moving forward. So some of these challenges and suggestions that we would create for each of the documentaries were mostly for the curators and researchers who were making these projects, so that we keep our work in context with the large conversations. And that was just a really personal thing that I wanted to include, and it would help me connect with my colleagues and my supervisors in a really interesting perspective. It was just another way to connect with them about this work and to see what meaning it had. Okay, so my other two, I have really last two guiding principles. There were always, even though there's always work, there were always breaks from work, and the Smithsonian is really good. It's a huge institution, so they've got to have lots of places to do self-care kind of thing. So one day they had ice cream and it was fun, and then they had the staff picnic, which was just crazy and fun. But I would encourage you guys to take your breaks because they're very important. And then my last guiding principle is just to remember that we were here, especially for me, I was at the Smithsonian, I was in a museum that called itself national, and then therefore would create a national story or a national history of African American culture and history. And recognizing and taking a step back and realizing what that means and how that will affect all the communities and publics that will then encounter the exhibition was really important. So I really spent a lot of time reflecting on where I was, what kind of work I was doing, and how it would eventually be encountered by many different communities from all over the world and all over the United States. So that was something that I really try to keep in mind, which is why I really pushed for using non-traditional sources, giving voices and names back to the Africans who were part of this slave economy. So I would encourage everyone to keep that in mind too. That's it. Yes.
What were some of the conversations like that you had with your mentors about this issue of scope and this sort of big picture, and then, like you said, making those suggestions about providing names of enslaved people, and what were the conversations like? I'm just kind of, I don't know if an example comes to mind.
Well, there were so many examples. I think I was really fortunate in the sense that I had Nancy as my supervisor, and she's been to Brown a few times. She probably will be back again, so I would encourage you guys to meet her when she does return. But she was always open from the very beginning about telling slavery and slavery in America from a perspective that, because it's a story that people think they already know, is to really encourage people to challenge those assumptions and those expectations of this story. So I think I was fortunate in the sense that she was already in that frame of mind, and she was thinking about this 5-6 years ago when she first joined the museum and was starting to build this script. So even the people they decided to quote, the sources they were using, all those different ideas that they were pulling in data from, she already had that in perspective. So when I was approaching her with, okay, well, we have to make sure that this gets translated into the videos that we're also producing, because the videos were being produced not in-house, they're being produced in the Smithsonian, but by another group. So we had to make sure that they at least knew that these were our principles and these were where these are the expectations we had, and these are the reasons why we have them, so that we can communicate that to another organization that would then take on making the video itself. Yes.
The video's under production now. Have you seen anything?
Yeah, well, I think we're on the docket, I think, to get our videos made in December, because for some reason our Slavery and Freedom Gallery is the last of the 11 galleries to have their videos be made. I don't know why, but that's the reason why they won't be made in probably until December. Although they did have their initial meeting and presentation, so they presented all my media treatments and research to the SI channel a couple weeks ago, actually, so I hope to hear back of what they say.